Off the southern tip of South America lies a graveyard. Not of people, of ships. More than 800 vessels rest beneath these waters. Over 10,000 sailors never came home. Most of them were never even found. For 400 years, sailors called this place the Everest of the sea. To round it was to gamble with death itself. Some ships vanished here without a trace, without even a distress call. What makes these waters so deadly? And why could no one ever save the men who fell overboard? At the very bottom of South America, past Chile's Tierra del Fuego, the land of fire, the continent breaks apart into islands and ends at a single black cliff rising from the sea. This is Cape Horn. It stands on a small treeless island, the last piece of land before Antarctica. Beyond it lies nothing but 600 miles of open water and ice. Here, the Pacific and the Atlantic collide head-on at the edge of the frozen Southern Ocean. And the map explains why. Cape Horn sits at 56 degrees south. Follow that line around the globe and you find something strange. Almost no land at all. At this latitude, the wind circles the entire planet without ever touching a mountain, a forest, a wall of any kind. Nothing slows it down. So it builds, around and around the Earth, gathering strength over thousands of miles of open ocean, until it slams into the one narrow gap between South America and Antarctica. Sailors had a saying, below 40 degrees south, there is no law. Below 50 degrees, there is no God. This was the doorway every ship had to pass. To understand what happened to them, we have to look beneath the surface. The sailors named the winds by latitude, each band worse than the last. The roaring 40s, the furious 50s, and at the bottom of the world, the screaming 60s. Down here, winds of 70 miles per hour are not a storm. They are ordinary weather. They blow almost year-round, driving rain, hail, and snow sideways across the water, even in the middle of summer. But wind alone doesn't sink 800 ships. The real killer at Cape Horn is hidden beneath the surface. Through the gap between South America and Antarctica flows the largest ocean current on the planet, the Antarctic Circumpolar Current. It carries more water than every river on Earth combined, moving through a channel 2.5 miles deep. Then, just south of the Horn, the seabead rises. Suddenly, from 2.5 miles deep to roughly 300 feet. Imagine the largest river of water in existence hitting an underwater wall. It has nowhere to go but up. The result is a kind of wave seen almost nowhere else on Earth. Short, steep, nearly vertical, a moving wall of water. Rogue waves here have reached close to 100 feet, the height of a 10-story building. A sailing ship caught beneath one doesn't ride over it. The wave simply falls on the ship. Thousands of tons of water all at once. And when the great current runs east while a gale blows west, the two forces fight, stacking the waves higher and making them break without warning. Then there is the cold. The water here stays just a few degrees above freezing, all year round, and drifting through it, icebergs, broken loose from Antarctica. In the age of sail, there was no radar. In fog or snow, a lookout might spot the ice through the murk when it was already too close to avoid. By the time the captain gave the order to turn, it no longer mattered. Wind, waves, ice, any one of them could kill a ship. At Cape Horn, they arrived together. But for the men on board, the sea had one more rule, the cruelest of all. To sail around Cape Horn, men had to climb 100 feet up the masts onto ropes coated in ice, to wrestle frozen sails with bare, bleeding hands, while the ship rolled violently beneath them. One mistake, one frozen finger slipping, and a man fell into water just above freezing. What happened next took only minutes. The moment a human body hits water this cold, it triggers what doctors call the cold shock response. The body gasps, automatically, uncontrollably. If the head is underwater at that moment, the lungs fill with the sea. For those who survive the first gasp, the cold goes to work. Within minutes, blood retreats from the arms and legs. Hands stop gripping. Legs stop kicking. Swimming becomes impossible, no matter how strong the man. In 15 to 30 minutes, unconsciousness. In these seas, no one lasted long enough to be rescued. But here's the part that haunted the sailors most. Rescue was never coming. A square-rigged ship running before a Cape Horn gale could not stop, could not slow down, could not turn around. Turning broadside to those waves meant capsizing and killing every man aboard. So when a sailor fell overboard, his shipmates did the only thing they could. They watched him. They listened to his voice fade, and they sailed on. It wasn't cruelty. It was arithmetic. One life, or all of them. Every man who climbed those masts knew the rule, and they climbed anyway, which raises the obvious question. Why would anyone sail here at all? For a century after Magellan, ships threaded the narrow strait to the north. Then, in 1578, a storm blew Francis Drake's ship far to the south and revealed open water where the maps showed nothing. In 1616, two Dutchmen, Schouten and Lemaire, became the first to round the Cape itself. They named it after their home port, the Dutch city of Hoorn. And for the next 3 centuries, this was the gate of world trade. The Strait of Magellan, further north, was a maze of rocks and dead winds. For the great square riggers, the open sea around the Horn was faster and deadlier. When gold was discovered in California in 1848, the traffic exploded. Grain, wool, gold seekers, saltpeter, the cargo that fed and armed the world came around the Horn. The men who survived the passage earned a title, Cape Horner. In any port on Earth, it commanded instant respect, and it came with a strange privilege. A Cape Horner had the right to wear a gold earring in the ear that had faced the Horn. For centuries, people mistook it for decoration. It wasn't. The gold was burial money. If a sailor drowned and his body washed ashore on some unknown coast, the earring was payment for whoever found him, payment for a grave and a proper burial. The men of Cape Horn wore their own funerals on their ears. One captain told his crew that God had made Cape Horn in wrath. The sailors had their own version. If you want to grow old, stay away from Cape Horn. Charles Darwin came here in 1832 aboard the Beagle. The storm he met nearly ended the voyage, and with it the theory of evolution before it began. He wrote of this place with awe and with dread. But some ships that entered these waters left no words behind at all. No survivors, no wreckage, nothing but silence. In early 1938, the German training ship Admiral Karpfanger was approaching the Horn, bound for Europe. A modern steel four-master with a crew of 60, many of them teenage cadets learning the sea. She carried a radio, a trained operator, every safety measure of her time. Somewhere near the Horn, she sent a routine radio message. Then, nothing. No distress call, no SOS. Her radio simply went silent, and the ship, 300 feet of steel, ceased to exist. Search vessels combed the coast for months. All they ever found, washed up on the shores of Tierra del Fuego, a few pieces of timber, and a single door. 60 men, gone so fast that no one had time to touch the radio. Investigators believed only 2 things could do that: an iceberg in the darkness, or a rogue wave falling on her like a mountain. The sea never gave a second clue. Other ships met a slower kind of hell. In 1905, the German bark Susanna arrived at the Horn sailing east to west against the wind, against the current, against everything. The passage should have taken about 2 weeks. The storms pushed her back, again, and again, and again. Her crew fought for every mile, tacking back and forth, sailing thousands of miles to gain a few hundred. Ice sheathed the decks. Waves swept the length of the ship. The men's hands split open in the cold. It took the Susanna 99 days to round Cape Horn. 3 months, battling a single corner of the map. When she finally reached port, only 8 men could still stand. The rest lay below in their bunks with broken bones and scurvy. And yet, somehow, not one of them died. The British ship San Rafael in 1876 faced the one enemy sailors feared more than the sea. Deep in her hold, her cargo of coal began to smolder, then burn. A ship on fire in freezing storm waters, hundreds of miles from help. The crew had one choice left: the lifeboats. One boat was found by a passing ship. Its men were saved. The other reached a desolate shore, far from any settlement. 9 men made land alive. And then, one by one, they starved. When help finally reached the site, there was nothing left to do but record the names of the dead. 800 ships, 10,000 men. Stories like these, multiplied across 3 centuries. In 1914, the Panama Canal opened and the world finally had another way through. The great fleets abandoned the Horn almost overnight. In 1949, a ship called the Pamir rounded it under sail alone, the last commercial sailing ship ever to do so. The age of Cape Horn was over, but the sea did not get safer. It was simply avoided. In 2001, the cruise ship Bremen, steel-hulled, radar-guided, built to modern standards, was crossing these waters when a rogue wave nearly 100 feet high smashed through her bridge windows. The impact shorted her instruments and killed her engines. For half an hour, a modern ship drifted powerless through the most violent seas on Earth, exactly like the sailing ships of 2 centuries before. She survived, on luck, and beneath her the old fleet still lies. Of the 800 ships lost here, only a handful have ever been found. The rest are simply gone. Researchers believe the great current grinds the wrecks apart, scattering them across the seafloor until nothing is left to find. The largest ship graveyard on Earth has almost no graves. By the Chilean Navy in 1992, it is a great wall of steel with a hole cut through its center in the shape of an albatross in flight. The shape comes from an old belief passed down among sailors for centuries, that the men who die at Cape Horn do not leave. Their souls become albatrosses, riding these winds forever. At the monument's base, a poem remembers the 10,000 who never came home. The wind there never stops. It howls through the albatross's wings, day and night, over a sea that can look, on a quiet day, almost gentle. But 800 ships rest somewhere below it, and most of them will never be found. Cape Horn keeps its dead. It is still out there, at the bottom of the world, screaming into the dark, waiting. If you want more stories the world tried to forget, subscribe.